Hello, Mahdi. First of all, thank you very much for having some time for this interview. I know that you gave a lot of interviews from OF to BBC and many others. Before we go into some details about the economic situation, which is your, of course, expertise, as an Iranian, are you optimistic or pessimistic in view of that dreadful and terrible situation in your home country?
Yeah, thank you for giving me the chance to talk about Iran and Iran's economy. Well, it's a dilemma for us. We have two feelings. We are happy at the same time, and we are sad. We are happy because we are hopeful that finally this evil regime will end and people will make their agency finally work and can make a final change. So we're still hopeful, and it makes us happy, but we are also sad because 16,000 people got shot in just 2 nights, and all of us are sad. It's not only us. I think it's this horror and fear spreads across the whole world. We are crying most of the time when we are alone and we are with other people. So we try to be optimistic. We try to be hopeful. It's a nation that has built its history for centuries and millennia. But now, for 50 years, for half a century, one evil was taking the whole nation hostage. From first days, it was starting its evil acts of killing people, cleansing the previous people of the previous dynasty or regime, and it is increasing. It is spreading lies by telling lies while they were mismanaging everything, while the regime was so cruel that whatever they were doing, they were selling a different viewpoint to the whole world. So now I think it's a very good time that the whole world understand that this regime was the one that was lying from the first day. It was not legitimate. It was just forcing the people to vote for some people between bad and worse all the time in the parliaments, in the presidential elections. So people had no agency. People had no contribution to the political system. Now people understand fully across different segments of society. It's very widespread that they want to have a role in the contribution, in the political contribution and power. They want to do what they will, and I think that's the time.
But how did it come? Because there was, well, there were some people already at the beginning who said that this regime will not be a democratic one. On the other hand, many people had hope that after the, let's say, authoritarian dynasty of the Shah, there will come another era, an era of at least some democratic values and principles. How did it come that it ended so badly? Or, as you said, from the beginning, it was already going in the wrong direction?
So I was not there at that time, in 1979.
Yeah, too young.
I was born much later, 6-7 years later after that. But I think there were several factors playing the role of bringing a cruel clergy to the political power. One factor was, of course, foreign power and foreign role in hosting Khomeini in Paris and advertising his own agenda to the whole world, not only to the world, but also to the Iranian society. Iranian society was developing in terms of economic and social freedom at the time of Shah, but Shah was prioritizing development over political freedom. That's why political freedom was not there, and people, again, like today, they wanted to have a voice. They wanted to have democracy, as you mentioned. So at the same time, the political geography, the geopolitics around Iran, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, or many other countries that were neighbors of Iran. Soviet Union was the neighbor of Iran at that time. So there was a great fear by the West that there's a potential for a change from the Shah's regime to something like a communist regime, because at that time there were two groups of people in opposition. One was clerical and Islamists who were supporting Khomeini, and the other one was leftist communists who were leaning on Soviet Union and communism, but they were also Islamists. So the fear of the choice between the two pushed the West to choose Khomeini instead of the communists. And then, of course, it became a clerical rule. It became Velayat-e-Faqih, which was the Ayatollah was giving the final voice, was giving the final political decision, and gradually it got even worse and worse. The political system became very much more extractive, not only in the sense of politics that pushed the people to vote less and less over 47 years, but also it became an economic extractive institution, so that it received political benefits and economic benefits from the society, like selling oil within the sanctions regimes, but distributing those rents and benefits only to the loyalists.
But in principle, of course, China is another situation. It's much bigger. It has not this kind of extractive resources. But theoretically, it's possible to have an authoritarian regime, but at least you have some economic progress in order to bind the people to the regime. But in Iran, that didn't happen because the economic progress was failing or is failing still. So can you explain what happened economically in Iran parallel to this increasing authoritarian and dictatorship?
Sure. So Iran's income per capita in real terms, like if we adjust by inflation and if we keep the exchange rate constant, Iran's real GDP per capita was at its peak in 1976, at the time of selling oil. So Shah was able to sell lots of oil, bringing money to the country, bringing foreign direct investment from the United States, from the UK. So it was developing a lot. But gradually, after a few years, the Islamic Revolution happened. And then immediately afterwards, the clerical supporters went and took hostage from the US embassy in Tehran. So immediately after, US initiated sanctions against Iran. So that was the first time sanctions were imposed against Iran. So since then, sanctions were one of the most important factors behind economic mismanagement, behind economic downturn and recession. But in addition to that, there was economic mismanagement. Khomeini himself did not believe in economics. He was a clerical Ayatollah. He didn't care about people's well-being. Gradually, after that, there was a war, 8-year war. So that period of 8-year war was a deconstruction of infrastructure. With Iraq. Yeah. So after Iran-Iraq war, Rafsanjani was the president, so who tried to reconstruct Iran, who invited investment, who boosted government expenditure to increase Iranian GDP. He was not bad, but he was not fully successful because he couldn't give political freedom. So political freedom agenda was coming with reformist President Khatami, who was the most successful president during the time of Islamic Republic because he managed to increase employment. He managed even to invite foreign direct investment for the first time in the history of Islamic Republic. Investment surged at the time of Khatami. Employment increased. So it was a time that the number of people employed in the society increased from 23% of population to 8% of population. So it was booming. Economic freedom was being issued across the whole nation. Privatization was taking place. But because he was also pursuing political freedom, Khamenei, who became the second leader of Islamic Republic, he didn't like it. So he initiated a kind of institutional reform to monopolize his power more and more. The students in Tehran, they protested against that. They protested against crackdown on newspapers, reformist newspapers, but again, it was suppressed. So it was one of the first times that there was an uprising in the Islamic Republic, and it was heavily suppressed. It was done by the protesters were students. So after Khatami, a populist hardliner came to power who was Ahmadinejad, who didn't know much about economics. He was successful in selling oil for high prices. It was the time, I think it was 2004 to 2009, a very high price of oil. He managed to increase oil revenues, but he didn't spend it on development. Instead, he spent it on cash handouts to the society, like direct subsidy. This direct subsidy, again, boosted inflation so that the inflation reduced the value of subsidy. So at the end, he didn't manage to develop the country. So it was the time, because he was a hardline president, he actually did opposite of what Khatami was doing. He actually confronted the West. He increased the nuclear activities of Iran, and that's exactly when, in 2006-07, new sanctions were imposed by the United Nations against Iranian nuclear activities. So that was, again, another turning point. Since 2007, from 2007 to 2020, Iran's income per capita in real terms was stagnating. It wasn't improving.
Was it due to the sanctions primarily, or mismanagement, or a mixture of both?
Mixture of both. It's a deadly mixture, because sanctions reduce the efficiency of economy, because it's costly to import, it's costly to export. So it's a low efficiency. There is no investment. So investment, foreign direct investment, was halted almost since Ahmadinejad, because it's not a friendly nation to the West anymore. There were lots of investment at the time of Khatami, like Peugeot invested in Iran. There were lots of automotive sector booming in Iran, managing to export to different countries, automobile. But since Ahmadinejad took the presidency, everything changed, everything got down, and then that's why people wanted to choose another guy, Rouhani, who was becoming friendly to the West, who wanted to resolve the issue of sanctions, who made the deal in Austria, in Vienna. He made a deal with 5+1 world powers and initiated the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action in the hope that other issues of concerns with the West would be resolved. Those other issues, in addition to nuclear activities, were regional issues, which is enmity with Israel, actually. The other issue was missile activities, and of course, the third, which was never discussed, was human rights issues. So Khamenei blocked him by not allowing him to continue negotiations to other issues of concerns. And I think that's why the next president of the United States, who was Donald Trump, did not like it. So he completely withdrew US from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. He reimposed previous sanctions that US was imposing. In addition to that, he imposed US secondary sanctions, meaning that if any country wanted to make business with Iran, they would have been penalized.
Let's stay with the sanctions. Many people say sanctions are especially hurting the middle class, because the very rich, they find always some way, the poor are staying poor, but the middle class who wants to have some consumption or some investment activity, is it also your opinion that the middle class, which is important for the development of a country, is especially hurt by sanctions?
That's exactly what happened. So since 2011, economy was stagnating. Because government was not able to sell oil, they couldn't support their budget. So they had to do different strategies and economic tactics. One of them was borrowing from the central bank, and the central bank was just printing money, because Iran was not able to get loans and credits even from Russia or China. So they needed to step up money supply so that prices were increasing as money supply was increasing. That was one issue behind. The second issue was because they were not able to sell oil almost 2-3 months at the end of the fiscal year, and fiscal year starts on 20th of March every year. So around this time, around December, the government was intentionally devaluing currency in order to increase its real term revenues of oil exports. So depreciation and inflation, they worked hand in hand. Depreciation causes imported goods become more expensive, and imported goods becoming more expensive would push up the inflation, and then it will become a vicious cycle. So this vicious cycle, we have it since 2011, when European Union sanctions intensified against Iran on nuclear activities, human rights issues. So imagine that inflation is a widespread tax on the economy, on the whole society, so that if you don't manage to increase your wages by inflation, you're getting poorer and poorer. So according to official statistics, currently about 1/3 to 40% of Iranians are under absolute poverty. So if you consider middle class between 25 percentile of income distribution to 75, their salary is about 1/3 to 1/4 of what it was in 2011, because inflation increased, but their salaries did not increase much. So I think that's the role of sanction and bad policies that the government implemented.
According to your opinion, is it the middle class which is now rising and is protesting? Is it the poorer one? What kind or what strata of society is predominantly going to the streets, or were going in the last days, especially in order to protest against the government and the government's policy?
So currently, since December 28th, when bazaris, the shopkeepers in bazaars of Iran, started going on the streets. Actually, it was the first time that bazaris initiated a strike against the regime, because they were friendly with the regime prior to the revolution. They were in the camp of, as I mentioned, there were two camps. They were in the camp of clerical regime.
Yeah.
So, because the aggregate demand is much, much low, and inflation is too high, people cannot afford to buy many things. People cannot even afford their daily lives, buying meat. People buy maybe the pensioners, the middle class that do not earn much, that they are not that they are not poor. They can buy maybe once or twice meat per month. So that's the demand effect, because there is no demand. When the government started to devalue currency in December, the bazaris found out that the currency is in low value, that their imports like iPhones, phones, computers, they cannot be afforded by anyone. They could not sell. So price was meaningless anymore. So that's why they initiated this strike. And this is a widespread thing across all segments of society. They cannot afford anymore. So maybe the top 20 or 30 percentiles of income distribution they manage. And those are maybe doctors, surgeons, highly educated people, or even managers in semi-public companies, in revolutionary guards, in ministries, not the rest of society. So that's only a little part. I told you that only about 29% of population is working. Imagine that only 10% or 15% of them can manage to afford such things, can buy phones, can buy laptops, not the rest of the society.
Revolutionary guards, very often this expression is mentioned. Who are they? And some people speak about some sort of an ideological industrial complex of these kind of revolutionary guards, as not only the people who carry the regime, but who earn out of the regime a lot of money. Is that true?
Of course. So if you check the budget of the government that is submitted just recently to the parliament for the next Persian calendar year, starting from March, you see that the amount of envisaged export of oil is equivalent to the amount of budget of the Revolutionary Guard Corps. It's the same, almost the same amount. And within the past few years, because Iran was unable to export oil, one of the most important technique was camouflage technique, so that they could export oil through tankers. On the sea, on the ocean, they were changing tankers, they were changing the transportation, and then they were going to different destinations. That was something that needed some logistical equipment, which was actually done by IRGC forces. So some part of Iranian oil export was given to the IRGC,
the
Revolutionary Guard Corps,
Oh.
yeah, so that they would be able to sell oil. So that's not the last point. They are widespread across the country. They have large companies, since the time of Ahmadinejad. At the time of actually Ahmadinejad, there was a failed privatization. And the privatization was giving the public companies, government companies, to private companies. But those private companies were the companies owned by IRGC. Like telecommunication, a big part of private communication, like they're offering SIM cards, is owned by the IRGC. Steel, aluminium, energy sector like gas, infrastructure building, civil engineering companies that they build not only infrastructure within Iran, but in Iraq, in Syria, even in Western Balkan. So they are very big. They are a big conglomerate that not only controlling military power, but also economic power.
Now, some people say, and obviously it seems to be true, that the environmental degradation in the country, especially concerning also the water supply, especially in Tehran, but also in some other cities, is also a contributing factor. How do you see the environmental situation in the country? Is it really as bleak as it is said in the Western or in the public?
Unfortunately, yes. So it's not only about pollution, that there is no air anymore. They took air from citizens of Tehran, Mashhad, Isfahan, Tabriz, large industrial cities. You cannot breathe there. It's like if you go to a cafe and everyone is smoking cigarettes, you cannot breathe. So the same thing, the worst air quality is the one in Tehran, especially in winter, that they are burning mazot instead of oil, instead of other natural resources. They are burning the worst energy or fossil fuels. So that's not only about air, it's also about water. So until a month ago or so, until around a month ago, many parts of Iran was not seeing rain for the past year. So there were lots of dams and water reserves that had no water anymore. But maybe that's the failure of the environmental and global warming. But beyond that, because the irrigation system in Iran is not efficient anymore, because they made dams everywhere. I mean, I'm not an environmental expert, but I read many environmental analysis. So Iran is on the verge of water bankruptcy, so that the tap waters are not working anymore, at least few hours a day. During summer, on every city, few hours a day there was no water, few hours a day there was no electricity. So the reason that there is no water does not mean that the government was able, or the government was not blamed for that. Yeah? The problem is that Iranian irrigation system is inefficient. In addition to that, IRGCs and many other corrupt rentier investors and businesses, large investment, they're using water. But the water is not recycled back into the system, it's completely vaporized. So there are different factors that led to the degradation of Iranian environmental system. For instance, if you check the Urumia Lake, which is on the northwest of Iran in Azeri area, it's completely out. There is no water in it. The problem was the construction of a bridge that was decided at the time of Ahmadinejad. So if they didn't build that bridge in the middle of the lake would be still alive.
Before coming to the future, maybe because you mentioned there were different issues, there was a nuclear issue, that there was, of course, this permanent animosity against Israel, not against specific policies, but in general against Israel. Then there were the different influences in Lebanon and Syria, and of course, especially the support for the West Syrian regime we had. But there was a neglect of the human rights issue in the country itself. could Europe have done something different, or the West, or especially Europe, because we don't want to speak now too much about the United States. Could we in Europe have done something different in the sense of supporting the people, criticizing the regime, putting some pressure on it? What's your opinion? Are you satisfied with what happened, or do you think, no, there was something missing and we should have done something better?
Of course, something more could have been done, especially in the past few years. In 2025, Iran executed 2,228 individuals. That's a historic record. Even China, I think, does not execute that many with 1 billion population. And execution, as I mentioned, it was a routine task from the first days of Islamic Republic. So if you take execution from the regime, the suppressive apparatus becomes unable. They cannot terrorize society, as we observed in the protests. They cannot kill and shoot and execute people on the streets, as they do also in prisons. So if you take this mechanism from the regime, I'm sure there will be some democratic, peaceful change and peaceful protests on the streets so that the regime changes. So that's the only last resort of the regime. So what could have European Union done, for instance? I had some opinions and I shared it, I think, with you and many other people. So imagine that we have a regime who has a diplomatic apparatus, and this diplomatic apparatus is supporting the executions in Iran as something that it belongs to the Islamic country. It's our ideology. It's something that people respect. But it's not. Execution is killing dignity of human being. So dignity matters most. And Europe made a mistake that prioritized its own agenda, Israel's agenda, over dignity of humans in some other parts of the world, which is Iran. So if EU was prioritizing dignity of Iranians within Iran, the first thing that the EU could have done was sacking maybe 1, 2, or several diplomatic staffs that many of them are IRGC commanders. They could have sacked at least 1 diplomatic staff for 1 execution in Iran. That could have pressurized Abbas Araghchi, Zarif, to do something about executions. So that's not done.
Yeah, I remember that you mentioned it several times also to me. But maybe you're right. I know that when I met Laranjani, both of them, I think they are brothers. The one is Parliament's president. The other one was for a time responsible for human rights issue. And when I mentioned the death penalty, he always said, like you said, yeah, that's our system. You don't respect our religion, our society. But probably you're right that maybe some more pressure should have been done on this issue as well. What else? Have another idea what should have been done, what could have been done to do beyond the pressure on the diplomatic services in our countries?
So in Iran, what has been missing was a united opposition front. And the reason that it is absence is actually a huge amount of suppression within Iran. There are a huge amount of political prisoners in Iran. There is no support for them. There is no internet whenever the country is blocking internet on uprising. So I have said several times in the past few years that EU or the US should provide a mechanism to give internet and digital connection to the society. Without digital connection, there could be no mobilization of the masses on the streets. And opposition is important. So one thing that EU, at least Austria as a neutral country, can do is to converge and mediate between different opposition powers. So for now, we observe that many cities in Iran, they chanted for Reza Pahlavi, who is the son of the late king of Iran. We see it also in many cities. In Vienna, there were protesters on Sunday, 6,000 of them. Many of them were supporting Pahlavi. Pahlavi is not the only opposition leader. He actually became more and more successful in the past years as he has credibility, as he is a son of the Shah, and also because of his resources. But there are also other opposition elements, like those in prison. Narges Mohammadi, the Nobel Peace Prize winner, is in prison. But nothing has been done for that. There was no direct contact between European Union members, any of them, with the people in Iran to just free her. So these things are the things that the EU could still do to help the society and to help the opposition. So if Republican Democrats, I'm, for instance, non-monarchic Republican Democrats, I support human rights over anything else, so that's why I don't support a monarchy telling me what to do or what not to do. So many people have similar opinions as I have. So if there's a chance to unite opposition in one conference to discuss how they can manage and how they can get united, I'm sure this will disunite the regime itself, and this will allow the society to be able to be mobilized better in the future.
In the beginning, you said you are relatively optimistic. Of course, you see with sadness what is happening, but you're in some way optimistic. I was very optimistic when things changed in Tunisia, but I'm very disappointed what happened afterwards. I was very optimistic and visited also not only Tunisia, but also Egypt when time there was a revolution, but I'm very sad what happened afterwards. So do you feel personally that things could happen in the same way, that there is a change, but the change will soon turn out to be a change in person, but not in the system, not in the authoritarian system?
So that's exactly why I believe that the united opposition could bring democracy. If opposition is not united, then after the toppling of the regime, that entity, that group that managed to topple the regime will take power and does not want to share it. So if we have unity before the revolution is done, then I'm more hopeful that a democracy would shape. In addition to that, in Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, there was no key figure like Pahlavi. There was no good alternative. Pahlavi is, of course, an alternative that is showing face, and he has a political base. And he needs to get united with other factions, with Kurds, with Baluch, with different ethnicities in Iran. He needs to be united with Republicans that are numerous, that are very intellectuals, who are supporting mainly democracy, so that it does not allow non-democratic movement after the revolution. So I think if they get united, checks and balances will be made before the revolution takes place. So that's why I believe united front is the most necessity during these times.
Some commentator who spoke about different ways how things could develop said, well, maybe it turns into another Turkey in the sense of an authoritarian government, but still with more or less free election and some sort of a democratic element, even if press freedom is not very high on the priority in Turkey. Would it be already progress if it goes in the direction of, let's say, a Turkish system of today, of Erdogan system?
I think so. It's not optimal. It's not optimal. But a secular authoritarian system is better than an ideological authoritarian system. The reason that Khamenei manages to kill 15,000, 16,000 individuals in just 2 nights is because he is ideologically believing that he is the leader of Muslim world, and his name will be remembered in history as Imam Hussein or Imam Hassan. Mm-hmm. He thinks ideologically. Imagine that Shah of Iran in 1979, he flew the country because he was afraid of killing people. There were some evidence that about 2,000 to 3,000 people got killed during the course of 15 years. And it was not his doing, it was of course the intelligence service, so that's why he withdrew. So imagine that another non-Islamic autocrat take the power, becomes like Erdogan, who respects human rights, who does not execute people. Then gradually maybe he opens up for reform, for democratization of the country if he does not stick to power. So we need to provide checks and balances so that it doesn't happen. It does not become more authoritarian. And I think that checks and balance could be provided not by a united opposition alone, but also by support of the international community.
And that hopefully would also change the whole situation in the Middle East, because if Iran would have a different policy, that would have an effect on Lebanon and also on Syria already. It has a weakened position. So in that sense, of course, another Iran means also another Middle East. Maybe also that these kind of use of threats of Mr. Netanyahu, that he always has to defend his country against Iran, would then also disappear. So there would be some hope also for the region connected with the hope for Iran.
Of course. Yeah, the region is like this, I think, because of the Islamic Republic. They exported their terror to the whole region because they didn't want non-Islamic ideologies to grow in the region. So I'm sure if they are toppled, the next regime, either secular authoritarian or a secular democrat, could help the Iran prosper, could help the region prosper, could prepare for peace in the whole region. Of course, I agree.
Mahdi, thank you very much for this very insightful debate and information you gave to our viewers and listeners.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.